Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today in this new workshop. So I'm just going to start by introducing our program. So CodeLabs Academy is a learning platform and coding school that offers bootcamps in a wide range of subjects such as data science, web development, UX UI design, and cybersecurity. All our bootcamps have flexible schedules and are paired with one-on-one career coaching from industry professionals. So if you are interested in starting a new career in tech or switching into a new field, head over to codelabsacademy.com and check out our upcoming sessions. Alright, so we can start with the workshop. Today's workshop is about React Native basics. So we'll try to build a simple React Native application to showcase the different concepts that will be involved in like starting web mobile development with React Native. As an introduction, React Native is a JavaScript framework used for building cross-platform applications. By cross-platform, we mean that we write the code with React Native, and the code will be run in both iOS and Android devices. So this feature of cross-platform is the main feature of React Native. This will allow us to speed up the development process, and it will allow us to save time and resources. To build React Native applications, there are many options to go with. The first one is to use the bare React Native framework. Although we don't prefer to use this option for beginners, since it requires a lot of pre-built or configurations that should be added to the application beforehand. So there is another option more geared toward beginner, which is using Expo. So Expo is a tool used to create React Native applications. Expo takes care of a lot of like advanced concepts like configuration and handling the deployment and publishing the applications, handling multiple application versions. So it's a tool that beginners can use to speed up the development of React Native applications. And this is the tool that we will be using today. Alright, let's get started. Before we start, we'll be building a simple to-do application that uses data from an external API and has manipulation on the application. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I want to do is to head over to my terminal. I'm just going to navigate to my desktop directory. So the first thing that I want to do is in order to use Expo, we have to install the Expo CLI. So to do that, it's quite simple. npm install -g to specify that I want to install Expo as a global dependency, and then Expo CLI. This command will install Expo CLI into your machine. I already have it installed in my machine. So next thing we do is, once we have Expo installed, the next step is to initialize an Expo project. To initialize an Expo project, it's quite simple. We just write Expo init and then the name of the project. In our case, let's just name it to do React Native example. And we wait. So Expo will set up all the dependencies of our project. Before that, we have this prompt right here. In this form, we can choose a template. As you can see right here, we have many options. We have the blank minimal canvas option. We can also choose the blank option with a TypeScript configuration if we want to use TypeScript in our mobile application. We can also choose to add tabs, which will have pre-built navigations in our application. Or we can just use the bare framework, which is similar to just using React Native without Expo. So I'm just going to use the first option, and I'm going to wait for Expo to set up my project. As you can see right here, JavaScript, or actually Expo, is installing the different JavaScript dependencies. This usually don't take long. It depends on your current network. Alright, we have all the dependencies installed. So the project is already created. I'm just gonna head over to my project. So to do. And I'm gonna open my project with VS Code. So to do that, I'm using the command code. Alright. As you can see right here, we have our project. We have a bunch of directories and files that we're gonna cover in a minute. So the first thing I want to do is to open the terminal in VS Code and hit the command expo. As you can see right here, we have all the different options and commands that we can use with the expo tool. The one that I want to talk about is this one. So the way expo works is that we create an expo account. This account will allow us to access all our applications and the different build packages. So the first thing you want to do is to create an expo account. Once you have your account created, you can log in with the expo CLI using the command expo login, and then you can introduce your credentials. You can check if you are already logged in using the command expo whomI. So I'm currently already logged in. As you can see right here, we have different commands. The one that we used a little bit earlier to create a new expo project. We have a bunch of commands right here to start the project in the local development server, to publish the application, to install other dependencies that we might need. We can also run the application in different simulators. And we also have other commands that are a little bit more advanced that we will cover in upcoming workshops. Alright. So the next thing I want to do is to install the dependencies. Before that, I'm just gonna change my current node version. So you won't have to do this. It's just related to my machine, since I'm using different node versions for different projects. I'm using the NVM tool to change between different node versions. And I'm gonna use the this version since it works with Expo. And then after that, I'm going to install the different JavaScript dependencies. So while we wait for the dependencies to get installed, we can cover the different directories that we have right here. So the first one is expo shared. We won't be needing this one in our application today. It basically just contains different expo variables that can be used if we are working in this project in a collaborative manner, meaning that if many developers are collaborating on this project, expo shared is used to keep shared variable between the different machines. We have the assets, the directory containing the different static files that we will use inside our application, like the different icons, images, and like videos. Basically just static files that we need inside the application. We have gitignore, which is not specific to expo. It's just used to specify files that we don't want to push into our repository. We have app.js, which is the main entry file to our application. As you can see right here, it follows a similar structure to a React component. So we have a functional component right here, with the difference that we are not using HTML tags. And actually, the difference with writing React and React Native is that with React we use HTML tags to render components, whereas right here we use pre-built React Native components. As you can see right here, view, which is the equivalent of a div. We have text, which is the equivalent of an H3 or a simple p tag. And yeah, for each React Native component, we have its HTML counterpart. And that way, we can specify additional parameters to these components to simplify or extend on the behavior of each component. You can check out the different React Native components in the official documentation right here. So if you head over to reactnative.dev, and you go to components, you will find the different components and their specific behavior, the parameters that they take in, and yeah, how to use them. And we also have the style sheet component that we imported from React Native. It is used to apply styling to our different components. As you can see right here, we create a style sheet element Inside the style sheet element, we have different styling objects that we pass to our specific component, so we can apply specific styling to it. In the syntax right here, it is similar to CSS. It works the same way as CSS with slight syntax differences. As you can see right here, in CSS it should be background dash color, whereas here it's with this notation. So you just take the CSS property and then give it the naming conventions used in React Native right here. Alright, so the next thing is app.json, which is just a JSON file containing different informations about our application. As you can see right here, we have the name, the version, the screen orientation, the icon. We might change these informations a little bit later once we deploy our application. But just keep in mind that this file contains general information about our application. We also have Babel configuration, so it's not specific to React Native. It's just, so Babel actually is a compiler that takes in modern JavaScript syntax and turns it into JavaScript that is understandable by most browsers. So here it just specifies basic configuration for Babel. We also have package.json, which is not also specific to React Native. It just keeps track of the different dependencies and their version, and also the scripts to use to manipulate or to interact with our code base. We also have yarn lock, which is just a JSON file used to, it's just a file used to keep track of the different versions of the dependencies that we installed. Okay, so I think we are done. We can now start our application. To start the application, I'm just gonna hit Expo Start. And I get this tab opened into my browser. As you can see right here, we have a bunch of options. We can keep track of the state of our application right here. As you can see, we have the info. We also have these options right here to run the application using different emulators. You can use the iOS simulator, the Android emulator. We can run it directly in the browser. We can use this QR code right here to test the application into a physical device. So from here, we have a bunch of options. It depends on your current operating system and your specific needs. I'm just gonna cover some options that are the easiest to get into, and then we're gonna choose one and go from there. So if you are currently using a Mac device, it's quite easy. You just use the command that we have seen earlier. This one to run using an iOS simulator. Oh, actually, I think you just have to type Expo and then open the iOS simulator using the iOS command. Aside from that, if you are using a Linux machine like I'm using right now, or a Windows machine, you have different options. You can run Android emulators using like third-party services. The most simple way to do it is to install Android Studio. So you head over to Android Studio and you install it. I already have it installed right here. Just gonna open Android Studio. As you can see right here in Android Studio, when you click on More Actions, you have the Virtual Device Manager. So actually, before we get into this, Android Studio is an integrated development environment used to build Android applications. With Android Studio, there is a tool called Virtual Device Manager that will allow you to use multiple Android simulators to test your applications. We can benefit from this feature to test our application, our React Native applications. So you select Virtual Device Manager. From here, you can create and start multiple emulators. You can create a device right here. As you can see right here, we have different phone types with different screen sizes and resolutions. We also have different categories like TVs and tablets if you are building applications for that are not specifically for smartphones. You can select the different devices right here. It doesn't really matter in our case, so you just select one and then hit next. Right here, it will ask you to select the Android operating system version. you might imagine that for certain applications we want to have a certain behavior, or we just want to restrict the application to work only on certain Android version or Android versions. So we might select the application right here and do our testing. For our specific use case, it doesn't matter, so you just hit next. Right here we have additional options that you can select, like the setup or startup or orientation, and for now it's not really important. And then you hit finish, and it will create your it will actually create your emulator. So I already have an emulator created right here. To start it, you just run this command, launch this AVD in the emulator. So this is the first option. Once you have your emulator running, you just go right here and select run on Android device /emulator, and it will detect your Android emulator and use it to run your React Native application. A second option that is the most easy one, if you don't want to install all other third-party services or software, you can just select right here, run on a web browser. So this is the quickest way to just get up and running with React Native. You just run the application in the browser. As you can see right here, we get the same message that's showing our application. Open up app.js to start working on your app. It's actually the starting message that we have right here, meaning that our application is working. Obviously, we can't just work on application in a large screen like this, so we can benefit from the development options offered in your browser. I'm using Chrome right here. So you select more tools and then developer tools. And right here, you can specify different screen sizes. As you can see right here, we have different screen sizes for phones and tablets. You just select one to test your application, as you can see right here. If I select this one, and I can see I have like a similar environment to an emulator, of a mobile emulator. And for most use cases, this is enough. And if you want to test other features that are only or more specifically related to the phone, like if you want to test the specific connectivity or access the GPS, or maybe check out the status of the battery, you would want to use the first option, which is using a proper Android emulator. For now, we will just use this one as it's the easiest one. All right. Just gonna reduce my screen so you can see both. Okay. And as you can see right here, we can see our changes being applied live. So if I change this one and hit save, as you can see right here, we get the changes into our application. And if you can see right here, it will automatically rerun our server, so we get all the latest updates. This is quite a neat feature, since it will speed up the development process and allow us to fix bugs in real time. Alright, so now that we have everything started, we can get started with our application. So as I said earlier, we'll be building a simple to-do application. So the application will contain a list of elements, of to-do elements with the title. Each element can be deleted with the dedicated button. At the very bottom right here, we have a button to add a to-do element. If you click on the button, it will open a pop-up form. The form will contain an input. We can use the input to introduce the new like title of the task or the to-do, and then hit add, and it will be added to the list. And as I said earlier, we'll be getting the initial data from an external API. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is to define the general structure of the application. I will add the title and the list of to-dos. So to do that, the first thing that I want to do is to add the title. So it's quite simple. I use the text component. Inside the text component, I'm gonna give it the title my to-do list. As you can see right here, I'm getting the title. To apply styling to my title, it's quite simple. I add the style, and then style dot, and then I just give it a name. So title text. And right here, I'm gonna add the title text style object. So actually the first thing that I want to do is to remove the align items. Since I want the title to be a little bit at the left, I'm gonna change the background color. So I have the color right here, so it's 1B. Okay. So next thing up is the title text. So let's give it a color white, a font weight of bold, a font size of 25, a margin top of 40, and a margin left of 15. Okay. So as you can see right here, it's the same syntax as, or it's the same as CSS with different syntax, or actually just the notation is a little bit different. Okay, so I actually want my title to be at the top, but once I add the list at the middle right here, it will take its place. So the next thing to do is to add the actual list of elements. So to add a list of items, there is multiple options to go with. For example, if we just want to do it in React, we can loop through the array or the array of elements that we want to render, and for each element render a specific sub-component. In React Native, there is actually a dedicated component for this called a flat list. It's a self-closing component. Actually, I will have to import it first. So flat list takes in a few parameters that we'll use to render the data. The first one is the actual data. So this one will contain the actual list of elements that we want to render. For now, we don't have any elements or actually any data that we keep our list in. So I'm going to keep the data in a list called to-do list, and I'm going to use state to persist the data. So I'm just going to import use state from React, and I'm going to create the state variable. So the initial value will be an empty array. So the to-do list variable will contain the list of to-dos, and the set to-do list is a function used to set or actually assign a new value to this state variable. So right here it will be to-do list. The next parameter is called render item. So render item is the component used to, or actually the React Native component used for rendering each item in the list. Render item. We don't have this one yet, so let's just name it to-do element. And let's create it at the top right here. So we'll just have a little bit of space in, since we will add a different other variables. So to-do element is a component that we will pass in the actual item. It will take the actual item and it will render a component for each to-do item. So it's a view. Inside the view, for now, we just have the text, the actual title of the to-do. So text. And the text will be the item title. Okay, so to add a couple of things is the key. Since each element or rendered element in the list we should have a unique ID or a unique key. Also, we'll add some styling. Let's just name it the same thing, to do element, and also some styling right here. Sorry, so it's styles dot let's name it to do text. Alright, so this will be our render item. Next thing up is the actual key extractor. It's the function used to extract the key from the array list and give it to the flat list. So key extractor. So it takes in the actual element of the list and returns the ID from that element. Okay, and finally, let's apply some styling to this as well. So styles dot let's name it list. Okay, so we added so the first thing I want to do is to add the different styling elements. The first one is the list. So to apply some styling to the list, we don't need much, so just some margin from the bottom. Since like I said earlier, we'll be having the add button right here, so we don't want the list item to interfere with the button. So margin button of 80 and some margin at the top of just 10. Okay, so next thing is the actual to-do element. So for the to-do element, or actually let's just add one element to the list so we can see the actual changes in the styling. So as I said, each element of the list will have an ID. Let's just do a random set of characters and the title. My first to-do. And I don't know if you can see it right here. We have the text of the first element in the flat list. So now we can, once we apply styling, it will look better. So for the to-do element, so for the actual to-do element, I'm just going to apply some background color, which is a different shade from the background. Okay, that's a little bit more visible. So some padding as well of 25 and some margin of 15. Let's make the border a little bit round, so border radius for these two last properties, flex direction and justify content, we don't need them for now. I'm just gonna add them round now so I don't forget about them. So this is basically just to specify that I want all the elements inside the view to be at the same level, at the same row. And to justify content is just to have some spacing between two elements. For now we just have one element, but later we'll add a button right here to remove the to-do elements, so it makes sense to apply this styling. Alright, and one final thing is to do the styling for to-do text. So for the to-do text, let's do some font size of 16 with a color white and a width of 80%. So the width is just to have enough spacing for the button that we'll add a little bit later, since if we don't add this property right here, it will actually like push the button outside of the borders of the element. So it's good to add it now. Alright, so we have the basic structure of the flat list. I think the next thing to do is to add the button to add the to-dos. So we actually have the button component in React Native, so we can actually use the button, but I just want to try something else, which is the pressable. It operates in the same fashion as the button component. So the pressable takes in a function called onPress, or a parameter called onPress. We'll pass in the function that will happen once we click on the button. So for now, let's just do a simple function, button clicked. And let's also apply some styling. So styles dot button, let's just name it button for now. And let's add a text inside it saying add to do. Alright, we should be having the element right here. I don't know if you can see it. So let's add the styling for the text as well. Button text. All right, let's add the styling right here. So the first one is for the, so the first one is for the button, and the second one is for the button text. All right, so for the button, I think we need so the first thing is the background color. So I have the color right here, so it's F25, and by the way, these are hex code for the colors. You can directly use the name of the color, white, or you can use the dedicated hex code for the color. We also want some padding of 20 and some margin as well. Actually, I forgot right here. Okay. All right, so like I said earlier, I want the button to be fixed at the bottom right here. So I don't want it to move depending on the length of the list. So to do that, I'm just going to use the position property in CSS. So position absolute. I want it to stay 10 pixels from the bottom and 10 pixels from the right, and let's do the same thing from the left. All right, and now we have a fixed button. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Let's also add some border radius. Let's just do it 10. All right, so last thing is to add the button text styling. So the color is white, the font weight is bold, and let's align the text at the center, and finally let's make it the text a little bit bigger. All right, and now we have our button right here. All right, we have our button. We don't have the functionality for it yet, so we'll be doing that next. So as I said earlier, once we click over the button, it will open a pop-up form containing the text input and the button to add the to-do. So for the pop-up form, we have a dedicated React Native component for this called a model. So if we navigate to in the documentation right here, if you can see right here, we have model. The model component is a basic way to present content above an enclosing view. I think we might be able to test it right here in the documentation. As you can see right here, we have a built-in emulator of Expo, so we can test the different components and test the behavior. I'm just going to wait for it to install different dependencies. And as you can see right here, if I click on show model, it will open this pop-up right here containing different information. This is useful to use if we want to the user to interact with the application, maybe validate certain actions or input certain data. This is quite useful since it encapsulates or it's actually just put this this model at the front of the page and removes or actually put the rest of the data back, so it's quite useful. All right, let's add it in our application. Just gonna go back to this. All right, so to add the model, we just have to import it. So model, let's do it above the title right here. So model, all right, so the model takes in a list of parameters. The first one is animation type. Let's do fade. If you can see right here, we have the different parameters that are taken from that are passed through to a model. if you can see right here, we have the animation type, we have slide, fade, and none. We also can use the transparent. Let's set it to true. Visible, which is the most important one. This parameter specifies whether we want to like show our model or not. We'll use this parameter right here to remove and show the model using a state variable. So for now, let's just make it true. So make this a little bit bigger. All right. Yeah, I think for now that's it. So inside the model, we have a view. Let's apply some styling to the view. Let's name it model view. So inside the view, we will be having the text input. So like I said earlier, so for the text input, we'll use the dedicated React Native component, text input. I might have to import it right here. All right. So for the text input, actually it's a self-closing component. So like this. So for its parameters, the first thing is on change text, sorry. So it takes in a method that will run each time the text is changed inside the input. It takes in the text as a parameter, and we want to keep track of the text inside the input, so we'll create a state for that. So a new state called to do. Let's make it initially an empty string. So this variable right here will contain the actual to do we intend to create. So it's the to do inside the input text. So right here, let's just change the set to do and make it the actual text inside the input. Also have value, which is to do. It's the same thing. And an optional placeholder just to specify to the user the actual purpose of the text input. So here it's to do title here. All right. For now, we can see the model since it's at the top right here, but it will be visible once we apply the styling. And one final thing is the actual button, so pressable. The button contains just the text, so the text says just add. So let's apply some styling to the button as well. So styles dot model button, and for the text as well. Okay. And we also need a function right here to add the actual text. So on press, and right here I think we need let's create a dedicated function for this. Let's name it handle add to do. We don't have this function for now. Yeah, it will be complaining until I create the function, so I will do that first. Let's make it we'll get back to this function in a minute. All right. Yeah, so we have the function right here, actually right here, and we have the text. So we will add the styling for the model view. Actually right here I forgot to add some styling as well. So the styling for the model view, the input, the model button, and the model text. All right, so let's get started with the styling. So First, let's do the input. So for the input, we'll add some static dimensions to it. So 48 pixel height, some padding of, let's say 10, some margin of 20, some border radius of 5. Let's add some width to the borders of 1 pixel, and let's make them gray so they are visible. Alright, so for the model view, the first thing is the background color. Let's make it white. And as you can see right here, we get the model at the top. So what we also need for the model, let's do some margin of 20 pixel, some padding as well, make it 25. Let's make everything at the center. Add some border radius of 20. Alright, I think it's looking good. So for now we have the model text left. Make it actually, let's start with the model button. So some padding of 20, some background color of, actually let's use the same color that we used earlier for the button. So it's this one, and some margin of 20 pixel. Alright, some border radius of 10. Okay, so now to the actual text. So white, font weight of bold, and let's also make it a little bit bigger, font size of 25, or actually I think let's make it just 50. And also let's align it at the center. Text align center. Okay, so I think that's it for now, or actually you can make it a little bit more bigger. Okay, so we have the input text, we have the button. All that's left now is to add the actual method right here to add the element to the list. So we can add the actual to-do parameter right here, but we don't need it since we have access to it from the state variable right here. So the way we're gonna go about this is to obviously it's just a matter of adding a new element to a list. So but first I just want to check if we actually have anything in the input. So if we don't have anything, I'm just gonna say empty text right here, since there isn't anything to add. If it's not the case, so set to-do list. Here I'm just gonna use the spread operator of JavaScript, so to-do list. This basically means that I want to assign to to-do list a new array. This array contains all the element in the previous to-do list plus a new element, which is an object. This object has an ID and a title. So the title, we get it from the to-do state variable, and the ID we can use a bunch of options right here. Actually, the thing that I want to do is to make the ID a number, and right here I'm gonna do to-do list.length +1. This way I'm always sure that the ID is a unique element from the list. So if we have a list of 20 elements, we know that the IDs will range from 1 to 20. And this way we know that a new element added will have the ID of 21. So all the elements are, or the IDs are unique. Alright, one final thing is to reset the to-do variable to an empty string. Alright, let's test this out. So title 34, let's hit add. As you can see right here, the element is added, but the model is not, it's still visible. So we might do something about that. If you remember in the model right here, we specified that it's always visible since it's visible true. So right here, we want to use a variable and change the state of that variable to change the visibility of the model. So I'm going to do it right here. So model visible. Initially it's false, meaning that the model is not visible, and I'm going to change it right here. Alright, and as you can see right here in the beginning, the model is not visible. So in the button right here, we want to make the model visible. So let's call the method set model visible, and let's make it true. Actually, just to do something a bit different, I'm going to do like this. Model visible. So basically this means that I want to set it to the opposite. So if it's true, let's make it false. If it's false, let's make it true. And as you can see right here, once I click over it, it gets the model is visible. So I add the title and hit add, but we also forgot to remove it once the element is added. So right here, set model visible, and let's do the same thing. Alright, so now we have the correct workflow. I add an element and I hit add, and we get the element added to the list, and the model is no longer visible. Alright, so we are done with the first functionality of adding an element. Just one thing that I want to change is, actually, if you can see right here, we have both the form and the button. It doesn't make sense to have both at the same time, since we want to, once we click over the button, we want the form to be the element that the user focuses on. So I'm just going to make the button disappears once the model is basically visible. So to do that, it's quite simple. This basically means that the visibility of the button will follow the opposite of the opposite state of the model visible variable, meaning that if the model visible is true, meaning that the form is visible, the button will not be visible, and vice versa. So now if I click on the button, it's no longer visible, and we get the actual form right here, and we get the new element right here, and we get the button once again. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is to add the option of removing elements from the list. So to do that, as I said earlier, I want to add a button right here. Once we click over it for each element, it will get removed from the list. Right here in the to-do element, we can basically add a button right here, but I want to do, or actually you can add a button with the text, but I want to do it a little bit different. We can actually use icons. So to use icons in React Native, it's quite simple. We have these different libraries that we can use. For example, React Native vector icons. Right here we have a selection of icons that we can use in our program. Also right here in the official documentation, if you hit icons, if you search icons in the documentation, or actually if we just write If we go to Expo vector icons, we'll find the different icons, or we can just pick the icons from here. So if I select one, for now it's not really important, since we can just select the icon from this website right here. Obviously there are different websites offering the same feature as this one. So the first thing I want to do is to actually import the icon. So import from vector icons, and I can directly use it right here. So add design. I'm gonna specify the name of the icon, so it's close circle with the size of 24, and we can also specify the color. So I have a color right here. Alright, I think we are having a problem. Actually, it's just this one. It's not really something important. Okay. So I actually typed it false. So it's close circle. And as you can see right here, we get the icon. Alright, so I want to actually click on the icon so the element is removed. So I'm just going to wrap it inside a pressable. Inside the pressable we have the icon. And let's add an onPress method. So for this one specifically, we can also add a method to handle removing elements. So let's just name it that, handle remove to do. And for actually this one will take in the ID of the elements, since we need to identify the element that we want to remove. Alright, let's add this function. So handle remove element, or remove to do. As I said, it takes in the ID of the element. So for this one, we can go about it in different ways. The most simple one is to create a copy of the to-do list. And from that copy, we filter the elements using the filter array method from JavaScript. Basically, if the ID is different, we keep the element in the list. If it's the same ID, we remove it. So I'm just going to create the copy. It's to-do list dot filter. It's the JavaScript array method. It takes in for each element in the array. It will test this condition, so element dot ID. If it's different from the actual ID provided, the element will stay in the array. If not, it will be removed. And then we can do set to do list and pass in the copy array. Alright, I just want to change something. So let's convert both to string. For this step specifically, it doesn't really matter for now, since we know the actual data type of the ID. But later, if we are using an external API to get the data, we might not know really like the type of the ID that we will get. Maybe it's a string, maybe it's a number. So to have a proper comparison right here, it's just better to convert both the types into a string and then compare from there, rather than maybe have an ID of a string and an ID of a number, and in that way this comparison will not work. All right, I hope that's clear. So as a general rule of thumb, we just don't assume we know the type of data that we are getting from an external resource. So we do our precautions in the front end. All right, so let's just test it. So if I remove the element, as you can see, it will be removed from the list. So let's add another one, title 1. Let's add a second element. And as you can see right here, if I remove the element, it's working correctly. All right, I think we made good progress. One final thing to do is to actually get the data from an external API. Since this is a React Native basics workshop, we won't be building our backend just to test this feature. So I chose to use this service right here, JSON placeholder. It's just a service that will allow us to have mock data to test our front end with it. It's just a REST API that serves data with different formats, and also has options to actually post data and delete and modify data. So we can use it to simulate the behavior of having an actual backend. We are getting the data from that backend and manipulating the data and showing it in our front end, which is what we usually do in production applications. As you can see right here, we have the post route. If I click on it, the API route here will return the list item. So we have a bunch of elements right here. Each element is an object containing different attributes. So we have the user ID, the title, and the body. As you can notice in our application, we just have the ID and the title, so we might do something about that. Yeah, so let's integrate this API. So let's get back to our code. So usually what we do is we call the API at the beginning of the workflow. In our case, at the beginning of initialization of this page. And once we have the data, once we have the data from the REST API, we showcase it in the front end. So to get the data as soon as the page is initialized, I'm going to use the use effect hook from React. And right here, I'm going to call use effect. So use effect takes in 2 parameters. The first one is the method actually called, and the second one is just to specify the options. For now, it's just an empty array to specify that I want it to happen once and at the beginning of the initialization of the page. So in the use effect method, I'm going to call the API using the fetch JavaScript library. So JavaScript or fetch is a library used to call APIs. I'm going to paste the URL that I got earlier, and then I'm going to chain to it a method. So I'm getting the response from the API. The first thing I want to do is to convert it into a JSON format so it's accessible from my application. Once I get the JSON format, if you remember, we said that we only want to keep the ID and the title. and the list has other attributes like the user ID, the body. So we want to filter out the list. To do that, it's quite simple. So let's create a new list called filtered list. So we map through the elements of the JSON array, and for each element, we create a new object containing only the ID and the title. And that way we get rid of the attributes that we don't need. Alright, one final thing is to set the to-do list with the filtered list. Alright, I have a typo right here, so everything is ready. As you can see right here, we get the list of elements from the actual API. It's as simple as this, and we can scroll over the elements. And we can also remove elements. It works fine. We can also add elements. So I'm just going to explain this code once again. So the first thing we do is to fetch the content or the data from the API using the fetch JavaScript library. Then we get the response from the API. We turn it into the JSON format. Once we have the JSON format, we create a new filtered out list containing the elements, the objects from the JSON list, just containing the ID and the title. And then we set the to-do list with the new filtered list. And then if for now we have the filtered, or actually the to-do list, it will start up all the process that we had earlier from the flat list, taking the data from the to-do list and rendering each element inside the to-do element, and so on and so forth. Alright, I think it's pretty clear. So I'm just gonna try to let's remove a bunch of elements since we have a lot of them. So let's just try to see if adding an element also works. So let's add an element. And as you can see right here, it's currently working. One final thing I want to do is, actually we didn't get the warning error. Actually, let's try to simulate it so you see. I think if we initialize the page once again, alright. So if I try to add an element right now, we'll get an actual warning. Yeah, I think we fixed it a little bit earlier, so we don't get the warning. But just out of precaution, let's just remove the first element since we don't need it right now. Alright, yeah, so our application is up and running. As you can see, we try to explore different basic concepts in React Native, from the styling of elements, from integrating the knowledge that we already had using React in the different hooks, also experimenting with the different React components and the parameters they take and how they behave in our application. We also see how we can call an external API. We also saw how we can integrate icons into our application. Yeah, I think we're done. So this was it for for today's workshop. Stay tuned for upcoming workshops. We will try to tackle more advanced subjects. And yeah, check out codelabsacademy.com for our upcoming sessions, and subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss out on the upcoming workshops. Thank you.